Welcome, fellow seekers of history's shadows. Before we journey into the shadowed corridors of medieval monasteries, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. I'm grateful you've joined me here. Tonight, our lantern turns toward an older doorway, an Arcadian cave, a patient tortoise, and a silver-tongued traveler. Breathe in, breathe out. And let the olive-scented night of ancient Greece gather round you as Hermes crafts a music so soft it convinces the dawn to wait. Night settles like cool linen over Arcadia, and the slopes of Mount Cyllene trade their sharp daylines for softened edges. Shepherd fires blink from distant terraces, and between them a darker seam opens, the cave where Maya keeps her quiet household. She prefers cedar smoke to chatter, and the careful economy of a lamp's small flame to any bright parade. Within this hush, where droplets count time more kindly than any clock ever could, a child draws his first plans. The cave is not empty stone, it is a keeper of sounds. The pop of resin in the coals, the feathery footfall of bats, the muffled bleat of a late returning lamb. Into this pantry of murmurs comes an idea, as if the mountain itself cleared its throat and suggested it. The moon finds its usual seat on the cave lip. Outside, a tortoise the size of a low bread loaf nibbles time and looks as unhurried as a proverb. Arcadian roads are old, older than the roads that were later drawn atop them, and the animals know every turn. But this tortoise knows nothing of music or of how a shell might carry a song, like a shallow bowl carries water. Maya sleeps the sensible sleep of someone who has mended and swept and counted grain by touch. The child does not. He is very new and very ancient at once, a bright glance beneath a knitted brow, already weighing the world as if it were a coin he might flick across a table and catch again. Outside, the Pleiades draw their little boat across the sky. Inside, a whisper of mischief begins to assemble itself. Not a storm, not a swagger, just a tidy plan, folded small and tucked beneath the heart. Tonight will be quiet, and yet quietly, everything will move. Morning in Arcadia does not ring, it unrolls. Steam rises from wet stone, and the cave smells of bread, wool, and washed clay jars. Myre, one of the Pleiad nymphs, keeps her world spare and sufficient. String tied to bundles, herbs hung to dry, a mortar whose patient bowl remembers more recipes than anyone living. She knows that tenderness is a kind of knowledge, and that it is best stored where it won't be jostled, under a shawl, behind the ribs, in a glance that lingers long enough to be sure. She tucks the child and hums something that has no name because it was never written, only handed along, the way water lends its shape to every cup. Outside, shepherds call to their goats in syllables that feel older than language. The child, already measuring distances, shadow to door, door to slope, slope to river, lets the notes pass over him and takes what he needs, a cadence for walking, a rhythm for hiding steps, a lullaby he intends to twist into laughter. Nymph lore is practical. How to love a mountain without telling it so loudly it crumbles. How to read a river without getting wet above the knee. How to borrow a star's attention without keeping it up past dawn. Maya has learned those lessons, and she suspects the child will misapply them in clever ways. Never cruel, never wasteful, but with the brisk thrift of a fox slipping a fence. She adds another log, coughs the fire back to cheer, and considers the day as if it were a cloak to be folded and tucked away, every corner aligned. Downslope, a tortoise trails a long, shining thread of morning across the dew. The child's eyes find it, and the plan that arrived last night begins to ask for tools, a shell, some cords, a frame, and because every good story needs one, a reason to hurry. Some inventions come loudly, all bronze and boast. Others arrive with the authority of a shrug. The child meets the tortoise at the cave mouth, where time spills its small perfume and ants argue about a crumb. He turns the shell over in his hands, gently, respectfully, as one considers the grain in wood before carving. Here is a dome that has already learned to hold silence. Here is a chamber that could be persuaded to hold sound. He taps it with a knuckle and listens to the cave answer. Resonance is not a term he knows, but he knows the behavior of echoes, the way a swallow knows the geometry of a tern. A frame will do. A bent branch to make a yoke, a crosspiece, and cords, gut if available, sinew if needed, stretched until the air itself feels tidier. He is not cruel to the animal. Greek stories are full of transformations, and he prefers the gentler kind. The shell, once home, will become a house for notes. He works with the brisk economy of someone who delights in shortcuts, but takes care with knots. The first string pings, the second sighs. The third, perhaps out of stubbornness, refuses and then relents. Noise becomes pattern, pattern becomes invitation. The cave listens, then agrees to keep the secret a little longer. Maya, busy with bread, pretends not to notice, because there are kinds of noticing that scare good luck away. Outside, the mountain breathes. In, out, and the child plucks again, shaping a scale that feels like a footpath, discovering it has been a song all along. This is blueprint thinking. Proportions, leverage, the way tautness can carry a whisper across a room. He chuckles, smiles not at the cleverness, but at the neatness of it, how a thing can become another thing, with only a few respectful changes. The first true tune is not a proclamation. It's an apology to the silence for waking it. The child tests the lyre with the gravity of a baker scoring bread. One note, then another, each a step placed where moss will remember it kindly. The cave returns the favour, a light bloom of echo, a rounding of edges, a hush that is somehow fuller than the hush that came before. What to play? The mountain suggests a rhythm, drip pours drip, and the lamp offers a second voice with its small, soft crackles. He threads a melody between them like a shuttle travelling a loom, and suddenly the space is woven. Air becoming cloth, cloth becoming a blanket that anyone listening might pull up to the chin. Maya smiles into her work because this is the sort of magic she approves of. Practical, comforting, useful. A lullaby is a tool, and tools are holy when they make the world gentler. Outside, sheep argue sleepily about the merits of certain grasses. Inside, the lyre discovers that its body remembers the tortoise's patience. Notes arrive sloped and unsharp, as if shaped by the same hands that made hills. The tune is not complicated. It is the sort of melody that would rather be remembered than admired, an agreeable guest that leaves before the bread runs out. With the lullaby comes a promise. Music can charm attention into rest. The child files the fact under future bargaining chips, a drawer in the mind he keeps without letting anyone know where it is. He plays again, and this time adds a tiny joke to the phrase, a musical wink, which makes the air smile, if air can be said to do such things. Good stories are stitched from contrasts, a tiny lyre and a large idea, soft strings and heavy hooves. Word reaches the child, because words always find such children. Of a herd watched by no one but stars and a god distracted by prophecy and laurel. Apollo keeps fine cattle, sleek as fresh pottery and proud of their own reflections in river water. They graze far off where the Homeric Hymn says they will, and their bells, if they wore them, would make a path of sound through the night. Fortunately for the plan, they do not. A heist then, but a very quiet one, gentle enough to be mistaken for weather. He studies the tools he has, the lyre's lull, a darkness friendly to quick feet, and the simple arithmetic of footprints. If a track tells a story, he wonders, can a story be persuaded to tell it backward? He smiles because answers are more cooperative when asked politely. Maya knows the look, eyes measuring, mouth amused, and she folds it into her kind of prayer. May he be safe, may he be clever, may he remember to come home. She does not say don't, because the word would only make the thing brighter. Instead, she oils the lamp and sets out bread, the domestic signatures of blessing. The mountain approves of plans that do not bruise it. The river downstream rehearses its shushing sounds, the herd, far away, shifts from one hip to the other, and considers a patch of richer grass. And in the cave, whose shadows now carry a little tune of their own, a traveller child lifts a small instrument, hums once for luck, and begins to think like a path. Every craft begins with a question. Hermes asks the ground how it prefers to be lied to and sets about making the politest fibs it has ever seen. From fresh bark and pliant twigs, he weaves sandals that will confuse any reader of earth, soles shaped to print as though walking home while walking away. The trick has a shepherd's honesty about it, not malice, just a practical conversation with dust. He tests them on a patch of damp soil. The prints look like visitors retreating toward the cave. He nods, pleased, and adds a fringe of brush to a switch so that he can blur any too eager clues. Motifs, the cunning intelligence that solves with a wink rather than a shove, purrs in approval. If the gods run the sky like a court, then Hermes will be the clerk who knows which door sticks and how much pressure it needs. Night gathers. The lyre rides against his shoulder, a cat that enjoys travel. He hums the lullaby under his breath, not to sleep the cattle yet. That would be rude without introductions, but to keep his own stride tidy. Downslope he goes, sandals whispering apologies to stones they misinform, brush sweeping a light forgetfulness over any hints too sharp for comfort. There's a comedy to it, if you squint, a baby making footwear to instruct the ground in backwards tales. But Arcadia has room for such jokes, and the mountain takes pride in raising resourceful children. By the time he reaches the lower terraces, the path is no longer a path, but a conversation he's having with it, one that smiles back. The pastures where Apollo's herd drifts are wide, and the moon, having considered the matter, lightens her veil enough for careful work. Hermes watches a while, learning the herd's grammar, who leads, who lags, which cow prefers the edges, which young bull lives for the drama of shallow streams. He doesn't plan to harm them. He plans to borrow their attention long enough to write a footnote in their evening. He approaches from the windside, a politeness most animals acknowledge. The lyre offers the quietest semaphore, barely a phrase, more a suggestion that there is no reason to be loud. It's remarkable how much can be arranged with gentle confidence. One by one, the cattle accept the idea of moving, a nudge here, a soft tap there, a pause to let a stubborn mind think it has invented compliance. All the while, the reversed sandals leave their tidy misinformation and the brush whispers away any narrative too eager to be discovered. This is where patience earns its bread. He chooses a smaller number from the herd, not greed, but precision, and folds them into motion like a cook folding egg whites into batter, light hands, no collapse. The stream takes their reflections and makes small, happy distortions, the grass pressed, and then springs back as if grateful to be included. Far off, Apollo listens to something else entirely, a prayer in Delphi, a string he tuned at noon, a laurel leaf telling a shy truth. For now, the pasture is a theatre with only one actor awake enough to notice the plot. Hermes raises a finger to his lips, purely for himself, and the night applauds by not objecting. Rivers remember things, but they're also good at keeping confidences, if asked nicely. At a ford where stones lie like sleeping turtles, Hermes persuades hooves to choose quiet water. He walks beside the leading cow, letting her decide, then agreeing with her decision. Leadership in miniature. The river lifts its hems around their legs and says, in its river way, very well, but be neat. He is neat. The reversed sandals work their small theatre on the muddy bank opposite, and the brush makes a light snow of leaves where the ground speaks too clearly. Beyond the crossing, the land lowers toward the sea. Salt creeps into the air like a thoughtful uncle, and the reeds gossip. Hermes follows a deer trail to a grotto curtained with long hanging leaves. a place fishermen sometimes use but none tonight. It is a room the earth built for secrets, large enough for silence to stretch its arms. Here he settles the cattle, arranging them the way one arranges sleeping children. Enough space to sigh, no space to wonder. The lyre offers a half-remembered phrase. He tests the grotto's acoustics with a note that sounds like the word hush sighing to itself. Satisfied, he steps back into the leaves and listens to the herd's breath even out. The sea sends a very small wave to see what the matter is, and, finding nothing that needs its opinion, changes the subject. The stars redraw themselves in the reflected dark of the grotto's pool. Hermes wipes his brush clean, tightens a sandal strap, and considers the next tidy difficulty, the matter of offering and obligation, which in this land are often settled with smoke, salt, and the careful naming of portions. To live in Greece is to know that smoke is a language. Hermes gathers dry laurel and olive twigs, a pair of straight sticks, and coaxes a seed of fire from wood's patient memory. The ember grows like a secret allowed to become a story, and soon a small, well-behaved flame licks the air. He builds a tidy hearth from stones already acquainted with heat, and thanks them by placing them well. There is an old grammar to offerings. What portion goes to gods? What to the world? What to the one who worked? Hermes doesn't stand on ceremony. He leans on it like a familiar fence. He chooses modest cuts, nothing greedy, nothing sloppy, and lets the smoke write its upward letter in slow strokes. Laurel, sighs, olive smells of kitchens and councils. He names the shares under his breath, not to flatter Olympus, but to remind himself that balance is a prettier word when it's practiced. The herd sleeps. The sea listens and whispers. Back an approval made of regular breath. Hermes turns once, twice, arranging coals towards silence rather than spectacle, and smiles at how order can be a lullaby when you practice it in small, careful gestures. He keeps a portion aside, not for hunger, which can be postponed, but for promise, which cannot. Some debts pay in advance. Some gifts wrap themselves the moment they are imagined. When the last spark finds a comfortable shoulder among the ashes, he scatters a little sand and smooths the place with his brush, as if combing a child's hair before a portrait. The night, which has seen many noisy rituals, appreciates this one for wearing soft shoes. A good thief of attention, never of hearts or herds for long, knows when to go home. Hermes takes the deer trail back as Dawn thinks about the matter but decides not to interfere. The lullaby helps. The reverse sandals finish their evening's polite deceit and are set aside like tools that have done nothing wrong. He slips into the cave, into swaddling, into the shape of someone who could not possibly have conducted a midnight seminar with cattle about the joys of quiet walking. Maya opens one eye the way lamp flame opens when the wick is pinched, briefly, bright enough to see what matters, then modest again. She smooths a fold of cloth and says nothing because nothing is the proper size of comment for certain achievements. The cave collects him back into its inventory: child, lamp, bread, lyre, silence slightly used but in good order. Far off, laurel leaves, whispering, whisper a different tune. Apollo, who hears more things than most and believes fewer of them, pauses. A shepherd's gait shows a smudge of mischief. A hoofprint discusses the possibility of having been elsewhere. The god tastes the air and finds under the usual flavors of dew and thyme a note of apology and smoke. He looks toward Arcadia and, Huckle, smiles, which is not the reaction one expects when one's cattle have been borrowed. It is the smile of someone mildly impressed against his will. The day arranges itself. Hermes snuggles deeper into blankets, already drafting a speech in which he resembles a feather in the wind of other people's plans. The lyre breathes like a cat on a warm step. Outside, the mountain begins the patient work of becoming noon, and along the laurel roads the first rumour sets off. Somewhere, softly, a trick has been done well. Morning lays a pale wash over Pierian grass, and every blade seems to remember where a hoof last pressed. Apollo, who reads tracks the way a scholar reads margins, steps lightly along the pasture's quiet commentary. The laurel in his hand does what laurel does, offers a thin, clean scent and a steadiness to thought. He notes the backward logic of certain prints, a fox's brush at work where no fox would have troubled itself, and the neat courtesy with which branches were returned to their shrubs. A mortal thief would brag in mud, this one edits. The god does not frown. He enjoys a puzzle that has been groomed before it is given to him, and the air here carries a faint aftertaste of olive smoke. An apology, or perhaps a recipe for one. He closes his eyes, lets the sun gather on his lids, and asks the pasture a polite question. It answers with a breeze that means Arcadia, and with the memory of a lullaby sinking like a pebble into still water. Music is a signature. Once you've heard it, you can recognize the handwriting anywhere. He takes the forward step that is also a beginning and a promise. Ruts soften under his sandals. Bees hurry to their errands, non-committal and useful. The prints, which have been telling a story backward, grow shy of themselves and disappear into the neatness of river pebbles. No matter. Apollo does not always need eyes on the ground. Sometimes he asks a laurel leaf to think for him, and it does, whispering of a cave, stitched with hearth smoke, and a nymph who makes calm, the way other people make stew. Somewhere ahead, a small smile is pretending to be a nap. The god walks toward it with a pace that respects time and refuses haste. Lyre arm relaxed, bow unstrung, thoughts pleasantly arranged. There is no anger in him, only a courteous curiosity. Who tuned the night so softly that hooves agreed to walk like thoughts? Dawn threads itself through the time at Maya's cave mouth, hemming shadow with gold. Apollo arrives as guests ought to arrive, visible, melodic, and with his radiance turned down to a polite setting. Maya meets him at the threshold where stone becomes morning, a shawl smelling faintly of bread and laurel ash. There is a language older than apologies and accusations, hospitality, and she speaks it first. A cup of water, a place to sit, the acknowledgement that news travels faster when it is not chased. Inside, the small suspect is practicing the cradle breath of innocence. One hand, inconveniently talented, rests where a tortoise-shell instrument also rests, as if the two had fallen asleep while gossiping. Apollo notes the alignment, and the corner of his mouth lifts because craft recognizes craft, even when swaddled. He accepts water, admires the cave's tidy shelves, and compliments a jar of olives as if they, too, were a minor achievement in music. Words follow the path that chairs and cups suggest. Maya, who understands that stories behave better when given room, offers a few quiet facts. The night was calm, the hearth was modest, the child is new, but experienced at being new. Apollo lets accusation wait outside with the dust. He asks, instead, to hear the lyre, purely to confirm that the signature he followed belongs to the person before him. Maya gestures to the instrument, and the cave, which loves a concert, holds its breath. The child's eyes open with the startled delight of someone whose plan has not only survived the night, but sprouted leaves. He does not deny anything because denial would be discourteous to the music. Instead, he sits up, adjusts the instrument, and prepares to make his first argument, in notes which are kinder to the ears than any speech. Testimony can be ink, or it can be vibration. Hermes chooses vibration, on the theory that sound tells the truth, not by insisting but by fitting. He plucks the first phrase. simple, almost domestic, and the cave supplies the remainder, building a room inside the room, where attention can sit down and stop fidgeting. Apollo listens with the professional courtesy of a god who has tuned more strings than most winds have counted leaves. The melody describes what happened without naming it. The patience of hooves, the courtesy of river stones, the leaf-curtained grotto, where sleep folded itself twice and stayed. Maya closes her eyes because closing them makes sound taller. Apollo's laurel leaf trembles slightly, pleased to be in the presence of good reasoning. The lullaby leans into a second theme, portioning fire, the modest smoke letter sent upward, the arithmetic of offerings done neat. Hermes does not confess. He demonstrates proportionality, which is its own kind of apology. When the last note chooses its chair and sits, the silence that follows is not empty, it is satisfied. Apollo smiles with both sides of his mouth now, not because he has been flattered. Music flatters no one, but because he has been answered in his own dialect. He asks a courteous question. Thoughtful, would the small craftsman mind explaining how a shell learned to speak? Hermes shrugs the way honest tools shrug, by showing themselves. He runs a finger along the curve of the tortoise-shell, taps the yoke, plucks 2 strings at once to let the cave hear the sweet interference where they meet. The demonstration is thorough, but never boastful, and the instrument glows with the contentment of a clever household gadget that has been put to proper use. Some conversations deserve a higher ceiling. Apollo suggests a brief visit to Olympus, not as an arrest, but as an invitation to let the matter find its larger shape. Maya knots Hermes into a shawl with the competence of a sailor tying a favored knot. The child accepts transport with the composure of a letter being delivered by hand. Apollo dims his brightness for mountain paths and sets a pace that flatters short legs. The road to Olympus is part goat track, part rumour. Pines stand like careful doormen, and clouds step aside to make a stair. Hermes watches how sun turns frost to breath and files away 3 new tricks involving reflections, which he will try later on puddles. He wears a small traveller's hat, the pastures, tilted as if conversation itself could be shaded. The lyre rides comfortably, owning the right to be present, the way bread owns the right to a table. They climb through air that tastes of resin and early snow. Along the way, Apollo tells stories of how councils work when thunder and hearth and sea share a room. You must be clear without shouting, brief without vanishing, and humorous when gravity grows greedy. Hermes practices a nod that says, I understand, and another that says, I might improve that. The mountain enjoys their rehearsal and lends good footing in return. At the cloud stair's top, Olympus reveals itself in the polite grandeur of a place used to company. Bright, tidy, and smelling faintly of myrrh and roasted barley. Hermes notes exits, entrances, and how voices carry in halls where marble behaves like an extra listener. He does not fear arrival. Arrivals are simply departures from the other side. The great hall of Olympus greets them with a light that behaves itself, bright enough to honor faces, gentle enough to leave no one squinting. Zeus sits where the room intends him to sit, not heavy, but anchored. The aegis nearby, like weather folded for travel. He regards the visitors with the expression of a grandfather who knows every trick but enjoys being surprised. Hera adjusts the table of cups so that conversation will move smoothly. Athena has already found a pen, though there is no paper. Apollo opens with the quiet truth. A herd stepped briefly into a story. The story was written backwards with sandals. The writer is present, willing to show his punctuation. Zeus invites the young artisan forward. Hermes bows in the style of someone returning a borrowed hour. Neat, efficient, grateful. He does not whine. He offers the instrument, explains the shell, names the strings, and lets the hall taste a phrase of the lullaby that persuaded hooves to become ideas. Cross-examination arrives like rain on a tiled roof. Useful, cleansing, patterned. Did you intend harm? No. Thoughtful. Did you intend learning? Yes. Did you remember offerings? Yes, with olive and laurel and tidy stones. Zeus nods because proportion has been attended to, and nothing delights him more than an argument that knows where to end. Hera, who respects households, approves of the neat hearth. Athena, who respects problems solved with minimal friction, approves of the reversed sandals as a proof of metis. Verdict: return peace to the pasture and let gifts travel the way gratitude travels, both directions. The hall relaxes as if a chord has resolved. Hermes is requested, very gently, to remain within sight for a little while, not as a tether, but as an apprenticeship to daylight. Because learning enjoys an audience, Hermes is invited to give a fuller demonstration. He treats the hall as a workshop, and the gods as attentive neighbors. First, the body, a shell whose geometry persuades air to gather and return. He taps gently, lets the room hear the dry thrum. Next, the arms and yoke, wood chosen for willingness rather than fame. Then the strings, gut stretched to the patient line where complaint turns into cooperation. Finally, the plectrum, a small mediator that understands both silence and sound. He plucks a scale and lets each note decide how long it wishes to stay. The hall shows its good manners by holding echoes without hoarding them. He introduces a drone, then a melody above it, explaining, chuckles, with a child's precise pride, how the steady tone is the ground on which a traveler can wander without getting lost. Apollo nods, because this is true of prophecy too, a hum of order beneath the bright syllables. Hermes plays the river crossing, a phrase that steps, pauses, steps. He plays the leaf curtain grotto, a shy arpeggio that peaks and retreats. He plays the hearth, a round, warm chord that smells of olive smoke in the ear. Few words, many understandings. Even Ares listens without tapping his foot too loudly, which for Ares is restraint. When the last demonstration ascends to the ceiling and folds itself among the coffers, Zeus claps once. The sound is soft, not because he cannot be thunderous, but because softness suits the invention. Thoughtful. If music is a tool, he says, it should pass to the one best suited to wield it widely. He looks to Apollo, whose life is largely made of strings and light, and the god of the lyre inclines his head, already halfway in love with the shell that turned patience into voice. Agreements on Olympus prefer ceremony that tastes of bread rather than iron. Thoughtful. Apollo makes an offer shaped like balance. The lyre, if given, will be taught to the world. In return, a gift suited to the giver's nature shall be placed in the child's hand. Hermes considers, not with greed, but with inventory. What makes a life useful? What instrument helps a person carry messages between rooms that dislike meeting? Apollo presents a slender rod, olive wood, well-tempered, meant for heralds, for crossing thresholds without bruising them. In time it will wear serpents for ornament and be called the caduceus. Today, it is simply a promise in the shape of a staff. Hermes accepts the exchange with the gravity of a cook accepting salt, understanding that flavor depends on how it is used. He passes the lyre to Apollo. Apollo passes the staff to Hermes. The room, which appreciates symmetry, breathes out. Alongside the staff come courtesies, leave to go swiftly where errands are shy, permission to smooth quarrels so that they become conversations, a seat near doorways where stories enter and leave. Hermes tries the weight of the rod and finds it pleasant, a kind of sentence he is eager to finish. Apollo tunes the lyre a whisper tighter and lets a sunbeam sit on it like a blessing. The herd will be restored, Apollo says, and the smoke letter already sent will be read as intention, not insult. Zeus nods. Hera adjusts a cup. Athena smiles the small, rare smile, reserved for solutions that required no parade. Peace is not dramatic here. It is simply well managed. Back in the corridor where clouds behave like courteous carpets, Hermes practices the new rhythm of his life. Step, notice, carry, return. The Picasso sits light on his head, its brim shading plans the way leaves shade tender shoots. He revisits sandalcraft with fresh intention, souls now honest, Prince declaring where he has gone so others may follow if following is kind. The trickster's brush becomes a courier's pen, erasing only where privacy is mercy. He learns routes, goat tracks that save an hour without stealing a breath, olive grove lanes where shade pours like cool water, ridge paths that make the sky feel close enough to borrow. Wayfinding becomes a lullaby of landmarks, the rock that resembles a kylix cup, the pine that leans as if listening, the stream that tells the same joke each afternoon. With staff in hand, he discovers that thresholds are instruments. Touch a doorframe lightly and rooms quiet themselves to hear you better. Messages are not only words. Sometimes he carries a sprig of myrtle that says, peace. Sometimes a spindle that says, work continues. Sometimes nothing but a gaze arranged to convey, you are seen. Speed is less important than arrival that leaves no ripples. He practices gratitude to paths, returning stones to comfortable places, smoothing ruts as he goes. Evenings find him at Maya's hearth, reporting not triumphs but small perfections. A shortcut learned, a quarrel softened, a child soothed by a story about a shell that found its second life. The staff leans by the door, acquiring the nicks and memories by which tools become biographies. Rivers keep schools for patient students. Beside the Alpheus, where reeds draw lines on the wind, Hermes sits with the new staff across his knees and listens to water conjugate the verb to go. A reed thick-walled and straight catches his eye. Instruments are simply conversations waiting to be carved, and this one asks to be given small windows for air to look out of. He obliges, cutting holes with the modesty of someone installing viewpoints, not doors. The first breath through the reed produces a soft huh tone, the sound a meadow might make if it remembered its childhood. He adjusts spacing, licks a finger, tries again. Soon a scale appears, not as proud as the lyre's, but companionable, like a neighbor who knows the names of your chickens. The melody that comes prefers the edge of hearing, perfect for guiding sheep at dusk or teaching a story to become a rumor in the gentlest way. He tests the flute's manners on a small audience, 2 ewes and a lamb with a persuasive wobble. They approve by not leaving. The river keeps the beat, a round sound that owns neither beginning nor end. And a heron writes brief comments in the margin with its narrow feet. Hermes, because another tool has joined the kit. Not to replace the lyre, which now sings for Apollo's broader stages, but to keep company with paths and doorways. When he pockets the reed, the bank remembers his seat in case he returns. It is happy work, inventing devices that help sound lie down next to silence without either taking offense. He leaves the place tidier than he found it, smoothing his imprint with the staff, as if telling the river, "Thank you for the lesson. I have copied it neatly." Back at the leaf-curtained grotto, where herd once breathed like one large sleeper, Hermes builds a hearth, as if drawing a circle around a thought. Olive twigs, laurel peelings, a ring of stones remembering warmth. He lights the fire not for spectacle, but for grammar. Smoke writes clauses the night can pass. This is not sacrifice to impress. It is an oath to remember. Instruments are for gentling. Roads are for linking. Cleverness is for easing knots rather than tightening them. He names the promises aloud, giving each one a place in the air. To walk swiftly, to speak softly, to invent tidily, to return what is borrowed with interest in the coin of order. The staff rests across his knees and feels heavier in a pleasant way, the weight of intention settling in. The reed flute, tucked at his belt, peeps once like a child agreeing to ride quietly. The grotto approves, leaf curtain barely moving, though the sea's breath encourages fidgeting. A small portion, Bread crisped at the edge, a thread of oil, goes to the listening world. Another portion goes to the traveller's future hunger, wrapped neatly to be unfolded where shade is scarce. The fire reduces to ember arithmetic. Ash smooths itself like a thoughtful page. Hermes scatters sand with the practiced grace of someone who knows. Stories end better when they leave the place, ready for another story. When he rises, the grotto holds the shape of his absence like a friendly chair. The sea offers a last, tiny applause against stones. Night rearranges stars to form a path toward home. The promises, once smoke, become the quietest kind of music, the sort you carry without noticing until someone asks why the air around you behaves so well. At the place where three goat paths consider one another and agree to be friends, the air smells of fennel and dust, warmed by yesterday's sun. Crossroads are not just locations, they are questions the earth asks politely. Hermes arrives with staff in hand and listens before answering. He knows that travelers need something to nod at, a presence that says, "You are seen and your choosing matters." So he gathers river-worn stones and builds a tidy marker waist-high. A face suggested with the least of lines, a crown of time for humor, a ribbon of bark to catch morning light. Thus a herm is raised, boundary stone, road guardian, a little column of reassurance. Lantern light, borrowed from a nearby cottage hearth, joins the marker for its first vigil. Hermes sets the lamp on a flat stone and teaches it the posture of patient flame. The three paths try on their evening names, one to market, one to mountain, one to river. He walks each a dozen steps, returns and arranges pebbles so that a stranger might read the ground's mood. Dry here, shady there, a good place for a noon rest just beyond the bend. A rustle introduces a figure at the margin of sight, a kindly, many-roaded presence who enjoys thresholds. She approves with the smallest tilt of invisible lantern. No omens, no alarms, only the assurance that cleverness and care can share a room without arguing. Hermes bows to the crossroad as if to an elder, and the paths, pleased to be consulted, lie down flatter underfoot. When he leaves, the herm keeps watch. Travelers will touch it and feel the pleasant shock of being in a story that intends them well. The lamp's flame shortens toward dawn, and the marker's little face keeps smiling the way stones smile by staying exactly where they are needed. Cities begin their day in whispers. In Athens, the agora yawns gently. Awnings unfurl, clay jars grunt as they are set down, and scales wake from their night of balance. Hermes arrives while Dew is still thinking about leaving. He watches merchants perform the choreography of trust. Weights lifted, pans leveled, cords checked for stretch. Bronze trade weights glint like sleepy constellations on a stall's felt pad, and a fishmonger hums a scale that is not musical until one notices its accuracy. This is a theatre of fair measure, and Hermes is fond of its quiet laws. He lends a hand where a string knots itself unnecessarily, suggests a shade angle that will keep figs cool, and rearranges traffic so that a potter and a goat herd do not attempt to occupy the same patch of air. The staff is useful for pointing, the petarsos for catching a greeting and returning it polished. He tests a set of measures by weighing morning itself, the scent of wet stone, the chalky sing of new-cut bread, the mulberry stain on a boy's fingers. The pans hang even. A pair of myrtle sprigs at the herb seller's stall signal peace to any quarrel trying to form. Hermes nudges them closer to the path's edge, where they can do the most good. When a threadbare scale lists, he slips a pebble beneath the short leg, rather than lecture the table about philosophy. Solutions should be as quiet as their causes. By the time shutters are fully awake, the agora breathes with the low, restful roar of contentment. Coins clink like small, well-trained bells. The sun rehearses its angles across amphora shoulders. Hermes pockets a lesson. Fairness is a kind of lullaby markets sing to themselves, and a messenger's job is to keep the song in key. Peace, to be complete, must visit the pasture as well as the court. Hermes returns to the Pierian meadows with a pocket of laurel ribbons and the patient smile of someone prepared to make amends in the language cows understand. Attention without hurry. Apollo is already there, trying the lyre's new speech against the morning. The notes settle over grass like mist deciding where to sit. Hermes begins with greetings, one for each glossy forehead, and allows the herd to remember that last time involved only unusual walking and a comfortable nap. He ties slender laurel to a few tails, not decoration but intention. A green punctuation mark that says the story ends here, happily. A bell, tuned soft as a clay cup tapped with a fingertip, is fitted to the lead cow. When it sounds like approval. They review the path to the river, this time for memory rather than misdirection. Hooves place themselves in yesterday's reassurance. Reeds nod. Apollo watches with the gentle pride of a craftsman, seeing his own art used to soothe. No speeches, no scolding, just the arithmetic of care done aloud, counting ears, counting contented sighs, counting the quiet. On a flat stone by the ford, Hermes sets a small token, a braid of straw and thyme, held with olive fibre. It is nothing and everything. A receipt written in plants, acknowledging that a loan was taken and returned with interesting courtesy. The river, pleased, performs its softest applause against ankles. By noon, the herd has arranged itself into the familiar geometry of grazing. The laurel ribbons make small, happy commas in the air. The bell agrees at intervals. Apollo nods once, enough to let sunlight pass through approval. Hermes accepts the nod, the way a path accepts a footprint. Briefly, without fuss, already smoothing the place for the next traveller. In a grove where shadows keep time for leaves, Apollo invites Hermes to share the shade and listen as the tortoise-shell, now in solar service, learns new customs. A hymn begins, not the trumpeting sort, but the kind that lets light practice its vowels. Apollo's fingers show how a melody can pour like noon across a temple floor without waking dust. How a drone can be the firm horizon within which prophecy draws diagrams. Hermes hears his lullaby's bones inside the bright garment, the river step, the leaf curtain arpeggio, the hearth-round chord. Apollo has expanded them the way the sun expands a dewdrop into a world. The god explains a simple geometry, how intervals comfort, how a fifth can open a window, how a mode can arrange the day's mood, like cushions at a symposium. No lecture, only practice. No command, only invitation. They try a call and answer. Hermes answers with flute playing, reed flute, the humble cousin eager to be helpful. Apollo replies with the lyre's clear handwriting. Birds edit their conversations to leave room. The grove's path, overhearing order, lies flatter, and a grasshopper decides to delay his solo until evening. Music here is not conquest, it is housekeeping for air. When the last phrase leans into silence, like a guest who knows when to stand, Apollo thanks the inventor, not with titles, but with a shared loaf and figs. Hermes answers with a chuckle's grin and a detail about sandal straps that never blister. Knowledge barters with knowledge. Both leave richer and somehow lighter, as if understanding were a coin that grows while you spend it. On the slopes of Hymettus, where time writes its purple cursive across stone, the air is busy with bees the colour of warm coins. Hermes visits a family of beekeepers whose clay hives sit like little ovens along a terrace wall. Work here is soft-handed and rhythmic. Smoke coaxed from pine needles, lids lifted just enough, honeycombs turned with the slowness that keeps sweetness from taking offence. He learns the vocabulary of bees, how calm travels down a wrist, how a veil is an agreement rather than a shield, how smoke is punctuation, meaning we are changing the subject now. A boy shows him wax cooled into neat tablets, perfect for pocket oaths. Hermes warms a tablet with his breath, and presses a promise into it with the tip of his staff, to carry messages as carefully as bees carry sunlight. They share a spoon of new honey that tastes like the whole hillside humming. The beekeeper's wife whispers recipes for sleep, warm milk sweetened with thyme honey, a slice of bread toasted over embers, a story about a tortoise who became a song. Hermes contributes a traveller's trick, how to keep honey from sloshing in a jar by tying a ribbon of straw across the mouth before sealing. She nods, pleased, to adopt useful manners. As afternoon leans toward gold, the hives settle into the low note of contentment. Bees trace invisible ladders between blossom and home. Each rung a rule that says, "Be gentle, and you will arrive." Hermes pockets the wax oath, sticky at the edges, and thinks how pleasant it is that some contracts taste of flowers. On the path down, time brushes his ankles like gratitude between two olive towns that agree to share a horizon. Hermes selects a spot where the road gathers itself, just before a rise, beside a fig tree that has perfected shade. Here he raises a taller marker, not a herm this time, but a slender pillar incised with a gentle truth. How far to water, how soon to mark it, where the wind is least opinionated at noon. He oils the stone with a thumb dipped in olive, not as flattery, but as hospitality. Even markers have skin that appreciates kindness. A string of travellers arrives in ones and twos, a mule with baskets of dates, a potter guarding cups wrapped in straw, a woman with a spindle that makes time into thread. Hermes offers each a blessing so small it might be mistaken for a suggestion. Walk in the wide places, drink before thirst grows noisy. If you sing, choose a key the hills enjoy. They nod, feeling their stride lengthen, not by inches but by permission. He adds a shallow bowl cut into the stone's shoulder. In winter it will catch rain. Today he fills it from a skin and floats a leaf for cheer. A child, whose sandals are unsure, learns how to step from shade spot to shade spot, and the road applauds by not tripping him. The pillar's inscription includes a joking line, "Beware the goat who argues loudly," which travellers read and immediately encounter a goat who indeed has opinions. Laughter is also a way to measure distance. Evening brushes the hilltop with lavender, and the new waypost learns its duties, to be leaned on, read, and thanked with a tap of the palm. Hermes walks a little further just to check the next bend for surprises and finds none, only the easy fact of a path doing its job. The sea has its own set of paths, laid not on earth but on water and sky. Hermes boards a small island skiff, whose oars know the sound of dawn. The boatman, a seasoned philosopher of ropes, teaches him the grammar of quiet oars. Dip, draw, feather, so that the wake is a line the wind reads without complaint. Above them, the North Star keeps its patient appointment, and the Lesser Bear points where a traveller may trust to arrive. They stop at coves where amphorae dream under nets, at harbours whose pylons wear wreaths of salt, at islets that specialise in birds. A Phoenician trader, courteous and curious, shows Hermes a painted board of harbour signs, simple pictographs that say wine, water, fair anchorage, words without words. The messenger nods, delighted to collect alphabets that do their work while looking like decoration. Night comes kindly. The Milky Way pours a road across black glass. Dolphins embroider the margin with silver thread. Hermes practices star routes, how to slide from one constellation to the next, as if stepping stones rose to meet the foot. He discovers that silence can tow a boat better than noise when the current is in a listening mood. The staff rests along the gunwale, picking up the moon's arguments and agreeing with all of them. At a harbour shrine, where a votive brazier keeps a tidy ember, Hermes leaves a seashell with a spiral that promises return. The boatman exchanges it for a proverb about wind. Respect the first hint, and you'll never meet the last shove. By morning, the skiff noses into a quay where figs and ropes and laughter perfume the air. Sea roads, Hermes notes, are simply sky roads rehearsed by water. Homes begin where heat learns its manners. In a farmhouse whose door opens straight into the kitchen of the world, Hermes is welcomed to Hestia's sort of lesson. Nothing to dazzle, everything to steady. The hearth is a square argument, resolved into a circle of flame. Barley loaves squat like contented stones at the rim. A pot murmurs about chickpeas, as if reviewing their character for a gentle play. Hestia's presence is felt as reliability, the way a flame holds the middle between hunger and smoke. Household rules are recited, not as law, but as recipes. Sweep before sleep, so dreams do not trip. Portion first for guests, then for gods, then for the pot that taught you patience. Hermes contributes a traveller's maxim. Leave the spoon handle turned out, so any latecomer can join without asking. Chuckles the room approves, and the spoon appears more welcoming at once. They talk about oaths that smell of bread rather than bronze. Hestia suggests the geometry of seating, how triangles of talk make even shy voices audible. She shows Hermes where a door wedge lives so draughts can be tamed kindly, and where a shelf keeps spare lamps for people who arrive with night still clinging to their cloaks. The messenger realizes a house is an instrument. Tune it, and conversation will play itself. When the loaves are ready, they are tapped for tone. Hollow means done. Dense means a moment longer with the lid on. Hermes eats slowly, as the bread teaches, and wipes the bowl with a piece saved for that office. In the ledger of gifts, he files this under instructions for peace disguised as soup. At the edge of an olive grove, where the ground gleams with fallen leaves like coins the trees have paid back, a press waits under a beam as long as a promise. Hermes runs a palm along the wood, feeling how grain stores instruction. Push here, rest there, let weight do what shouting cannot. The pressmaster, part carpenter, part poet of leverage, demonstrates the patient screw that lowers a plate onto fruit wrapped in woven mats. Oil arrives not in a hurry but in agreement, a thin green ribbon pooling like calm. Hermes enjoys machines that make patience visible. He traces the threads of the screw with his fingertip, counts the turns between almost and enough, and learns the song of creak, pause, drip. The master points out small mercies, a wedge to relieve a tired arm, a wooden trough angled so each drop finds the jar without getting lost in grief. The messenger adds a suggestion: line the jar's neck with a braided reed ring to catch leaves. And the master nods, already fitting one. The grove contributes its own counsel. Wind combs the trees softly, and they respond by letting go of what they no longer need. The press house smells of green and stone, and the idea of winter made friendly. A boy with a clay lamp trims its wick with a practiced pinch. Light brims without complaining. When the jar is filled, Hermes seals it with wax from Hymettus, stamping the lid with a sign no thief of taste would break. A tiny tortoise beneath a lyre, history distilled into a cameo. The master gifts him a small flask for Maya. Hermes accepts as if accepting advice, with thanks, with plans, with the intention to pour it where bread will notice. Messages deserve dignified housing. In a tanner's courtyard where hides hang like quiet sails and the air smells of smoke persuaded to be useful, Hermes designs a pouch that will not argue with weather. Goat leather, soft enough to flatter scrolls but sturdy enough to ignore thorns, is cut to a pattern learned from rivers, broad at the mouth, narrowing where currents want discipline. He chooses a closure meant to yield to fingers and resist chance, a thong looped through a slit and fixed with a toggle carved from olive pit. Straps are the real conversation. A single crossbody band rides the shoulder, but a secondary cord snakes from hip to belt, distributing weight the way a well-told story distributes blame, fairly, lightly. Knots are selected like proverbs, a sailor's hitch that listens when tugged properly, a flat knot that lies down and refuses to make a fuss under a cloak. The tanner shows him a stitch that refuses drama even when years pull at it. Hermes pays with coin and with a tale about a goat who disliked loud buckles. The courtyard approves of jokes that reduce friction. He tests the pouch with things that matter: Wax tablets, a reed flute, a sprig of myrtle, a small sealed flask, a folded scrap of linen for emergencies that are really just opportunities for neatness. Everything settles without complaint. When he walks, the satchel skims the hip like a well-trained thought. To finish, he presses a signet into a dab of warm wax on the inner flap, a tiny wing that knows the shortest, honest route. The tanner adds a blessing in the form of a drop of oil on each knot. Hermes bows to the craft and to the courtyard's patient shade, and steps out feeling how gear, once properly tuned, becomes confidence you can wear. Delphi greets visitors with the steady patience of terraces that have learned to hold mountains in their laps. Cypress trees speak in narrow columns, and the rock warms slowly as if remembering each footstep that has ever asked a question here. Hermes climbs the sacred path without hurrying, passing wreath makers, laurel sellers, and a trio of pilgrims who have perfected the art of walking as a form of sentence. At the sanctuary's heart sits the omphalos, the navel stone, netted in carved cords, an old geography declaring, quite reasonably, that the middle is wherever attention agrees to stay. He touches the stone as one might touch a bell before striking it, and listens. Stones have manners, some gossip, some keep counsel. This one hums in the throat of the place, a note that helps words find their chairs. Nearby, a seam in the cliff offers a whispering wall, a spot where sound likes to fold back upon itself and consider what it has said. Hermes tests a phrase about journeys, spoken softly. The cliff returns it rounded, domesticated, ready to live in a house. The Pythia, busy with larger matters, is not required for this lesson. A temple attendant demonstrates instead how to address a god as if addressing a door. Knocking, knock gently. State your name. Refrain from pretending you were not the one who knocked. Hermes nods, pockets the etiquette, and leaves a sprig of myrtle for the corridor of echoes, payment for services rendered. He studies the cues, the offerings, the measured silences that bloom between questions and their replies, and recognizes the same arithmetic he used on the riverbank. Ask neatly, answer kindly, leave the place more orderly than you found it. Before departing, he teaches the omphalos a small melody, the shell-born lullaby, abbreviated into 3 notes. The stone does not change exactly. It merely agrees to remember how to suggest calm to the next uncertain breath that lingers near. On the descent, Laurel brushes his knees like punctuation, and the road, well pleased with the morning's diction, decides not to stumble. In a Levantine harbour where cedar masts write vertical notes against a salt blue staff, Hermes visits a counting house, lined with rolled reeds and jars of ink dark as figs. A Phoenician clerk, smiling with the serenity of someone who trusts vowels, explains their compact alphabet. Letters like tools, each doing honest work without adornment. No crowded pantheon of signs, a small crew that rows far. The clerk scratches a sample on a shard of broken amphora. Aleph for ox, Beth for house, Gimel for camel, whose neck bends like a question. Hermes tests the letters, the way a walker tests stepping stones, lightly, confidently, delighted that messages can be packed small without losing their dignity. He learns how ship ledgers carry whole voyages inside a handful of strokes, cargoes named, winds implied, a city's appetite tallied in lines anyone with patience can hear. The clerk teaches a trick for drying ink with sand, so words do not smudge into quarrels, and a habit of drawing a tiny wave at the bottom of a page to remind a reader where the sea participated. They trade gifts. Hermes leaves a reed flute scale written as dots and lines, a kind of music alphabet, while the clerk offers a quick primer on seal impressions, those little round promises that tell doors how to behave. Outside, dockhands coil ropes into sleeping snakes. An ivory-inlaid box clicks its lid shut with the finality of a well-placed period. The harbour smells of pitch and citrus and the prospect of dinner. By afternoon, Hermes can write his name in a script that does not mind travelling, and he uses it to mark a packet for Maya. Oil, honey, a folded proverb. Alphabets, he decides, are boats you can fold into your pocket. Unfold them, and whole coasts step ashore. A scribe's shop in an Ionian town stores time the way jars store olives, neatly. with brine enough to keep memory supple. Wax tablets sleep in a stack tied with cord. Styluses rest like polite silverfish along the edge of a polished board. The master scribe, thin as a bookmark, eyes quick, welcomes Hermes into the quiet where sentences are shaved, combed, and set. Tablet etiquette is simple and profound. Warm the wax with breath, not flame. It remembers kindness. Write with the narrow end, erase with the broad. Smooth with a thumb that has learned patience from bread dough. Do not press, as if trying to convince the future, invite it. Hermes practices, copying place names that fit like pebbles in the mind's pocket. Phocea, Miletus, Mytilene. The stylus makes a sound like tiny oars. They discuss margins, how empty space is hospitality for thought, how a small sketch, fish for fishmonger, key for gatehouse, laurel for temple, helps a messenger cross dialects without waking a quarrel. The scribe shares a trick for private lines. Slant them slightly, so the eye that owns the tilt understands the hint. Hermes donates a traveller's note about folding, crease toward the least important sentence, so the most important emerges first, like a host at a door. A boy apprentice brings figs and a jug of watered wine. The shop breathes sweeter. Hermes scratches a line meant only for Maya. Oil arrived, bees approve, paths polite, then smooths half of it away, trusting that the tone will carry the rest. Tools are blessed with a dab of olive. The cord is retied in a knot that loosens without tantrum. When he leaves, the tablets ride in the satchel, as if it had been designed for them, which, in a kind, careful sense, it has. Outside, the town resumes its light clatter. Inside the wax, words nap, ready to wake at a touch and behave well. City gates have their own kind of bedtime, administered by men who count shadows like coins and prefer good stories told quietly to excitement told loudly. Hermes arrives at dusk as the portcullis yawns down to its comfortable evening height. The captain of the watch, cloak pinned with a modest bronze sun, offers the night's password token, a clay disc impressed with a barley ear on one face, a tiny ladder on the other. Grain and rung, supper and safety. Hermes asks how the tokens travel, thoughtful. Gently, the captain says, and only in hands that know when to be hands and when to be pockets. He explains gatehouse grammar, questions first, then welcome. Names clear, then footsteps. Torches here are taught to whisper. Footsteps here practice the art of stepping around sleep. Hermes watches a runner arrive from a neighbouring town, offer the ladder side up, and receive a nod that lowers the drawbridge, less like a boast than a blink. He learns the circuit of the walls, where wind tugs cloaks rudely, where mortar remembers an earthquake and prefers kindness. The captain keeps a slate tallied with small mercies, water for a shepherd late to market, a cot for a child whose sandals defeated him, an extra cloak for someone who swore the moon would be enough. Hermes contributes a rope loop hung at the inner gate for pots and parcels to be lowered without waking the hinges. The wall appreciates the consideration. When the first stars choose their usual seats, the city sighs into night. Dogs agree to announce only what deserves announcing. Hermes leaves the password token with the captain. Tonight, grain to the inside, ladder to the road, and carries away the pleasure of a guardhouse that believes safety is a form of courtesy. Along a coastal ridge where time keeps the hours in purple and bees translate them into honey, Hermes visits a line of beacon hills. Each summit wears a stone platform and a careful pile of seasoned wood, dry as a proverb, ready to speak in light. The beacon master, wrapped in a cloak that smells of ash and patience, explains the grammar. 1 blaze for warning, 2 for arrival, 3 for send the boat, 4 for send also bread. No panic, only syntax, flame as courier. They rehearse by daylight. Hermes walks the spacing, counting breaths between peaks, studying how wind handles messages. He learns the discipline of kindling, small sticks that do not argue, larger ones that agree to lift the sentence, and the courtesy of quenching, which is how a hill says thank you to its neighbours. A bronze mirror comes out to catch the sun and push it gently toward the next post. A diurnal footnote. The sea listens, as seas do, pretending indifference while memorizing everything. At dusk, they perform a calm relay. Two flames rise in sequence along the spine of the land, curving like a necklace toward an island quay. A fisherman looks up from mending nets, nods, and adjusts his plans without drama. Somewhere inland, a baker decides to keep his oven warm a little longer. Somewhere seaward, a small crew finishes their soup. Hermes likes systems that let many people finish their soup. He leaves a gift, a basket of oiled covers to shelter tinder from sudden weather, lids that shrug off rain with the elegance of a polite refusal. The beacon master adds a note to the hill's ledger stone. Borrowed wind, returned message, no smoke wasted. The ridge grows dark again, but not silent. Hills remember conversations in the language of readiness. On a dusty plain, ribbed with tracks that cannot agree which city is favourite, Hermes meets a heterodromus, a day runner, whose calves write essays in the margin of each stride. The runner wears an olive wreath dampened with water to teach heat its manners, and carries a baton wrapped in linen to keep sweat from adding its own unhelpful gloss. They talk pacing, how to measure a mile by the song of breath, how to steal shade without robbing speed, how a sip can be a sentence if placed at the right comma. Hermes offers relay wisdom. Place waypoints where birds rest, because birds have a genius for survivable distances. Bury a jar at the boundary stone and mark the spot with a joke only the next runner will understand. The heterodromos, in return, demonstrates foot wraps that refuse blisters and an ankle roll that argues a stone out of a quarrel with your balance. They practice handoffs not as drama but as housekeeping, baton moving like a thought that knows where it belongs. A small crowd gathers, a potter, a vine pruner, a shepherd who swears he once beat a storm to the next hill. Hermes adjudicates gently and invents a rule. Storms get a head start. Runners get olives after. The plain agrees. A cloud walks across the sun, and everyone pretends not to be grateful. By evening, the runner departs in a line of dust that never raises its voice. Hermes watches until the olive crown becomes a dot, then nothing, and feels the pleasant ache of a plan tuned to bodies that deserve kindness. Roads, he thinks, are instruments too. Teach them the tempo of care, and feet will play them for years. Where two orchards have spent too long debating where one ends and the other begins, Hermes arrives with a knotted rope and a recipe for politeness. The farmers, one with a beard like a broom, the other with a hat that believes itself authoritative, have excellent arguments, all plausible and loudly phrased. Hermes listens until the words tire, then unties the rope from his staff and lays it across the dispute, as one lays linen across a table before setting bowls. Knots mark cubits, pegs offer witness. He walks the line, counting in a voice that invites agreement to hatch out of air. The land, pleased to be consulted in units it understands, gives back reasonable numbers. A fig tree, previously neutral, is declared a friend to both parties. It nods modestly and promises fruit for whichever child climbs it most gently. Hermes proposes a truce shaped like shade. From noon to 2, both orchards may rest under the disputed branches, and whoever tells the better joke that day wins the right to sweep. Both men, surprised into laughter, are already composing riddles. He smooths a small map into wax, a rectangle, a curve where the stream repeats itself, a dot for the fig. Seals are pressed, thumbs, not signets. because this is domestic law, neighbor to neighbor. The rope coils with the satisfied air of a tool that has been believed. Hermes blesses the cornerstones with a dab of olive. They enjoy the attention and agree to stay put. By afternoon's end, baskets pass back and forth full of peace offerings, early pears, late almonds, a loaf that somehow tastes of apology and fennel. The hat relaxes. The beard becomes less like a broom and more like a conversation. Land, Hermes thinks, prefers laughter to lines. But if lines are required, let them be measured kindly. In a hillside sanctuary dedicated to a healing god, steps rise in wide, even breaths toward a colonnade that teaches columns how to stand politely. Acolytes rehearse with small handbells whose tones are shy enough to steady crowds without startling birds. Hermes studies the flow, incense, sandals, the soft logistics of faith. The head priest, as a librarian, explains their choreography. Bells to gather, water to cool, benches to give knees and stories a rest. Hermes suggests a cue that curves through shade, so waiting becomes less an argument with time and more a conversation with cypress. A bowl for tokens collects the day's wishes, wool for health, barley for harvest, tiny clay fish for a river that needs to remember its manners. He admires the clepsydra that times consultations, a water clock whose drip writes a gentle stanza, and offers to carve a notch that will sing a slightly lower note when the hour softens into farewell. A family arrives carrying a child whose cough argues with sleep. Bells murmur. The crowd adjusts to make room without losing its temper. Hermes steps aside with the pleasure of a system working and leaves a reed flute melody with an acolyte who promises to play it near the portico where breezes like to linger. The sanctuary receives the tune, folds it into its ordinary miracle of quiet, and hands back the hour in better shape than it took it. He writes a brief line on a wax tablet, shade curved, bells pleased, water wise, and presses it into the priest's hand. No fee, only the joy of tools tuned until they don't feel like tools at all. The bells answer with a note that sounds like a kindly door. In an artisan's courtyard, fragrant with mortar and lemon leaves, sundials lean against the wall like patient moons, each calibrated to the ambitions of a particular latitude. Hermes stands where the gnome's shadow writes noon and reads the inscription, "Do not blame me for winter." The sundial maker and introduces him to the other half of the day's grammar, the clepsydra, a jar with a disciplined drip that turns water into syllables. They compare tempos. Sun prefers declamation. Water enjoys lullabies. Together, they keep a city breathing in time. Courts, markets, baths, arranged so that no single hour is forced to carry too much. The maker shows a portable sundial no bigger than a handful of olives, its string and peg stowing neatly like a good proverb. Hermes tests it, tilting until the shadow honors the mark, and admires a device that tells truth gently. He proposes a kindness, a notch on the clepsydra's lid that sings when the jar wishes to be refilled. No alarm, only a suggestion. The maker listens, carves, tests. A lower drip note arrives, agreeable as a friend remembering to speak softly in a library. They drink watered wine under a vine that has perfected shade, and the courtyard observes their respect for an afternoon's dignity. Before leaving, Hermes buys a small sundial for Maya and writes on its base in the new alphabet, light, measured politely. He ties the parcel with a narrow ribbon of reed, knots that yield without sulking, and imagines it sitting beside the lamp at the cave's door, a conversation between day and night conducted in good faith. The road home knows his steps and shortens itself politely. Mount Cyllene rises with the composure of someone expecting company, and the cave, washed in evening, smells of bread, oil, and the bookish leather of the new satchel. Maya looks up from the hearth and smiles the smile that includes both past and supper. Hermes sets down his parcels, honey, oil, a sundial, a wax tablet that has travelled well, and leans the staff where it can listen to conversation without interrupting. They dine in the quiet industry of families, half sentences that land exactly where they should, olives nudged toward the hand that needs them, crumbs disciplined into a neat circle on a wooden board. Hermes describes the omphalos, the alphabet seed, the hemerodromos' olive crown. Maya contributes updates from the local world, a ewe insistent on naming her lamb, a fig tree that thinks itself generous, a storm that toured the valley politely and left everything in place. Later, the lyre, now in Apollo's larger care, sends down a bright rumour. Somewhere, a hymn is singing with tortoise patience under its gold. Hermes replies with the reed flute's modest voice, a lullaby that fits in a pocket and behaves well. They recall, without saying so loudly, the very quiet heist that taught night to walk softly. Reversed sandals, leaf curtain grotto, smoke letters sent in tidy script. No guilt, no glory, only the satisfaction of a story that turned out neatly and left both pasture and heart improved. Maya places the sundial where morning can find it, and presses a thumb into warm wax to seal an evening that requires no signature. Outside, the mountain counts stars the way a baker counts loaves. Inside, the lamp lowers its voice, and everyone, including plans, practices sleep. Night, patient as an old librarian, turns another page above Arcadia, and the lines on the hills read themselves more slowly, and then more slowly still, until they become the wide, even handwriting of sleep. The cave breathes the way a hearth breathes after the last loaf is done, and the lamp, happy with its small, finished work, trims its own light to a comfortable whisper. We leave the bustling harbours and clever workshops far behind. We set down the staff beside the door, and we let the sandals remember, quietly, how to be still. In the mind's gentle courtyard, the omphalos hums, not to summon answers, but to remind each question that it can soften at the edges and find a chair. The reed flute is only a breath now. It rises, leans, rests, and the air carries it as easily as a jar carries water along a shaded path. A sundial sleeps under folded dawn. A clepsydra slows its careful drip, and all the measured minutes agree to drowse together, like bees in evening time, heavy with good work and honey. Let the pasture's ribbon tails sway once more, almost imperceptibly, and then not at all. Let the beacon hills keep their firewood dry, and their promises drier, unneeded tonight beneath a sky that already speaks in stars. The road between orchards lies very flat. The boundary stones, freshly blessed, are content to watch and say nothing. Far away, Apollo's tortoise-shell lyre thinks kindly of its first lullaby, while here, at the mountain's doorstep, a smaller melody remembers how to fold itself into silence without leaving a crease. Breathe in olive and laurel and bread. Breathe out the dust of travel and the polite burdens of the day. May your sleep be a calm harbour, and your dreams drift like slow boats on friendly currents, until the earliest bird suggests morning, softly, softly, softer.